She was a billionaire heiress, trapped in a loveless world of power and control. He was a kind-hearted young doctor, drawn to the mystery of the woman in a coma. But when his gentle touch stirred her awake, fate ignited a love so intense it defied all odds. Ryan Carter stood at the entrance of room 507, the VIP section of Sinclair Private Hospital. The dim glow of medical monitors flickered in the otherwise silent room. He took a deep breath before stepping inside. There she was, lying on the hospital bed, was Emily Sinclair, the billionaire heiress who had been in a coma for 6 long months. Her golden brown hair fanned out on the pillow, her delicate features frozen in an expression of peace. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the only sign that she was still alive, still breathing, still there, even if the world thought she was lost. Ryan had read about her before. The world had once called her the Angel of New York, a woman who used her fortune not for luxury, but for charity, orphanages, and hospitals. She was known for her bravery and kindness, not just her wealth. But now, she was nothing more than a motionless figure in an expensive hospital bed. His throat tightened as he approached her, gently checking the IV drip, the oxygen flow, and the bandages on her arm. The scent of sterile antiseptics, mixed with the faintest hint of lavender, a fragrance that clung to her as if it was a part of her soul. "Miss Sinclair," he whispered, knowing she couldn't hear him. Or could she? A doctor's silent devotion. Ryan had been in the medical field long enough to know the science of comas, but something about Emily made him believe in something beyond medicine, beyond logic. Unlike the other doctors, who simply checked her vitals and left, he lingered. Every night, before ending his shift, he found himself talking to her, his words filling the silence of her lonely room. "I don't know if you can hear me," he said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead as he changed her bandage. "But I hope you do. I hope you're fighting your way back." The strange part, it didn't feel like he was talking to an unconscious patient. It felt like he was talking to someone who was listening, someone who wanted to wake up, but couldn't. The mystery of her accident. Ryan had seen her medical reports: severe head trauma, internal injuries. The official report called it an unfortunate accident, but there were whispers. Some nurses didn't believe it was just an accident. Some doctors said it was too strange. A powerful woman like Emily Sinclair, driving alone that night, only to lose control and crash with no witnesses. Ryan wasn't one for conspiracy theories, but the more he looked at her fragile form, at the bruises that had once covered her skin, the more he felt something was terribly wrong. A fateful touch. "Something changes," he sighed, running a tired hand through his hair as he reached for her wrist, gently turning it over to replace the old bandage. His fingers lightly brushed against her skin, a touch so soft it should have meant nothing. But suddenly, her fingers twitched. Ryan froze, his pulse spiked as he looked up at her face. Was it his imagination? Had she really moved? Beep, beep. The heart monitor picked up speed. His breath caught in his throat. Then, her lips parted, ever so slightly. A sound barely audible left her mouth. A whisper, a single word. "Ryan." A breath between life and death. Ryan's world stopped. The sterile white hospital walls blurred. The beeping monitors faded into the background, and all he could hear was the ghost of her voice. A whisper so soft, so fragile, yet it held the power to shake him to his core. Ryan. His name. His name. A deep shiver ran down his spine. He had never met Emily Sinclair before taking this job. She had been in a coma for 6 months. So how did she know his name? His hands trembled as he gently cupped hers, his fingers wrapping around her delicate wrist. "Emily." His voice was barely above a whisper, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. Her eyelashes fluttered, a weak movement, but it was enough. Her lips parted again, as though she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Her breathing turned shallow, her fingers twitched again. Ryan's heart raced. This was impossible. "Emily, if you can hear me, try to move your fingers again," he pleaded, his voice gentle, urgent. For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, a soft squeeze, a gasp escaped his lips. His grip on her tightened as pure emotion surged through his chest. She was there, somewhere deep within the darkness. She was trying to come back. The room comes alive. Doctors rush in. Ryan's trance broke when the heart monitor beeped erratically, signaling movement. Within seconds, the door burst open, and a team of doctors rushed in. "Dr. Carter, what's happening?" Dr. Sullivan, the head physician, demanded. "She moved," Ryan said breathlessly. "She whispered my name." A stunned silence fell over the room. "Nurse, check her vitals," Dr. Sullivan barked. "Prepare for neurological tests." Ryan reluctantly stepped back as the team crowded around Emily, checking her pupils, blood pressure, and brain activity. He should have left the room, but he couldn't. His feet remained rooted to the floor, his eyes never leaving her face. Emily's body remained still again, as if exhausted from the effort. But Ryan knew what he had seen, what he had felt. She was waking up. A mystery deepens. How did she know his name? After hours of tests, the room finally cleared, leaving only Ryan and Dr. Sullivan. The older doctor adjusted his glasses and sighed. "Her brain activity has changed. It's too soon to say she's waking up completely." But he shook his head in disbelief. "If she did say your name, that's unusual." Ryan exhaled. "She doesn't know me. We've never met before. I've only been her doctor for 2 weeks." Dr. Sullivan studied him. "Then, how does she know your name?" Ryan had no answer. A silent plea. "Stay with me." Later that night, long after the doctors had left, Ryan found himself drawn back to her room. He stood by her bedside, staring down at her face, so peaceful, so untouched by the cruelty of the world outside. "I don't know how you know me," he murmured, his fingers grazing the back of her hand, "but I swear, I won't leave your side until you wake up and tell me yourself." His grip tightened just slightly, a silent promise, and then, her fingers moved again, this time curling around his. A silent room, a growing connection. The dim glow of the moon filtered through the blinds, casting soft shadows across Emily Sinclair's peaceful face. The hospital room was quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of the monitors, yet to Ryan, it felt like the air itself hummed with something unspoken. Her fingers were still wrapped around his. The warmth of her skin against his own sent a surge of emotions through him: hope, disbelief, and something deeper. He had seen countless patients in his medical career, had treated people from all walks of life, but never had he felt this pull toward anyone. He should have pulled away. He should have told himself it was nothing more than an involuntary muscle reflex, but he couldn't. His voice was barely a whisper. "Emily, are you trying to tell me something?" No response, no movement, only the steady sound of her breathing. Ryan let out a soft, shaky sigh, gently placing her hand back on the bed. "I don't know how you know my name," he murmured, his eyes never leaving her face, "but I swear I'll be here when you wake up." His heart clenched at the thought. What if she never did? A past he never spoke of. As he stood there, watching her, a painful memory surfaced, one he had buried deep. His younger sister Lily. She had been only 10 when she slipped into a coma after a tragic accident. Ryan, barely a teenager himself, had spent endless nights by her bedside, holding her hand, whispering to her, begging her to come back. But she never did. She passed away after 6 months, and now, standing beside Emily, he felt that same ache in his chest, the fear of losing someone who couldn't even respond. But this time, he refused to let fate win. The unseen presence. Was she listening? What Ryan didn't know was that deep in the endless darkness of her mind, Emily could hear him, trapped in a void, weightless, lost, yet his voice reached her. "I'll be here when you wake up." Somewhere in the distance of her unconscious world, she felt a warmth, a presence that called to her, a name, his name, Ryan. It was the only thing that felt real, a moment that changed everything. Just as Ryan turned to leave, a sudden shudder ran through Emily's body. His head snapped back toward her, her fingers twitched, her lips parted slightly, and then she gasped. Her entire body jolted, as if something had broken free inside her. Ryan rushed to her side, his hands gripping her shoulders gently. "Emily." Her eyelids fluttered, and for the first time in 6 months, she opened her eyes. They were the most breathtaking shade of hazel, a mix of gold and green, glowing with confusion, pain, and recognition. Ryan felt his entire world tilt as her gaze locked onto his. She barely had the strength to speak, but when she did, it was a whisper that sent shivers through him. "You kept your promise." The first moments of life again. Ryan's breath caught in his throat as Emily's hazel eyes stared straight into his. He had dreamed of this moment, prayed for it, but now that it was happening, he found himself frozen, completely lost in the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "You kept your promise." Her voice was fragile, barely more than a whisper, but it struck him like a thunderclap. He swallowed hard, his hands still gently gripping her shoulders. "Emily." His voice was thick with emotion. "Can you hear me?" A flicker of exhaustion passed through her eyes, but she nodded. A slow, weak nod, but it was enough to make Ryan's heart race. "Yes," she whispered, her lips barely moving. A rush of pure relief flooded through him. He exhaled shakily, his grip tightening just slightly, as if afraid that if he let go she would slip away again. "You've been in a coma for 6 months, he told her softly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Do you remember what happened?" Emily's brows knitted together. She tried to speak, but instead, a single tear slipped down her cheek. Ryan's chest clenched painfully. The weight of the past. He reached out without thinking, his thumb gently brushing away the tear. His touch was soft, hesitant, but Emily leaned into it. His heart skipped a beat. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice trembling. "Everything feels distant, like a dream." Ryan nodded, trying to keep his emotions in check. "That's normal. Your brain has been asleep for a long time." Emily's breathing hitched, and her fingers trembled as she lifted a weak hand, reaching for him. Ryan reacted instinctively. He caught her hand in his, enveloping it in warmth. Her skin was cold, fragile, like a delicate flower that had just begun to bloom again. She looked at him so intently, as if searching for something in his eyes. "How do I know you?" His body tensed. That question, he had been asking himself the same thing. He hesitated, staring at their intertwined fingers. "I don't know." Emily's lips parted, confusion deepening in her gaze. "But I feel like I do," she whispered. "I don't remember anything, but when I woke up, your name was the only thing I knew." Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. A connection beyond logic. It made no sense. They had never met before her coma. He had only been assigned as her doctor 2 weeks ago. Yet somehow, she had known him. A deep, unspoken connection hung between them, invisible, undeniable. Ryan should have brushed it off, told her it was just a strange coincidence. But the truth was, he felt it too. From the first moment he had entered her room, there had been something about her, something familiar, something that pulled him toward her like gravity. And now, staring into her soulful, tear-filled eyes, he realized one thing. He never wanted to let go. The overwhelming moment, his confession. Ryan swallowed, his throat dry. "Emily, I don't have an answer, but I swear, I will help you find the truth, whatever it takes." Emily's lashes fluttered as another tear fell, but this time, her lips curved into the faintest, softest smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Ryan felt an unexplainable warmth spread through his chest. She was awake, she was here, and though they had never truly met before this, it felt like they had known each other forever. The fragile moments of awakening. Emily's fingers trembled as Ryan held them, his warmth anchoring her to reality. She had woken up from a darkness that felt endless, and yet, the first thing she saw, the first thing she felt, was him, Ryan. His name had been carved into the silence of her unconscious mind. How? She didn't know.
But deep in her heart, she was certain of one thing: she had been waiting for him. Her hazel eyes searched his, looking for answers she knew he couldn't give. Her voice was hoarse, fragile. "How long have you been here?" Ryan swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. "Since I was assigned to your case 2 weeks ago," he admitted. "But it feels like longer." Emily's breath hitched at his words. She felt it too. There was something about him, his presence, his voice, the way his touch sent warmth through her fragile body, that felt familiar, comforting. But that wasn't possible, was it? A past she couldn't remember. She tried to dig through the fog in her mind, searching for memories. But everything was blank. The accident, the 6 months of lost time, her own life. Nothing came back. Her fingers clutched Ryan's hand tighter in panic. "I don't remember who I am." Ryan's heart clenched at the desperation in her voice. He knew this was common in coma patients, but seeing her pain tore him apart in ways he didn't understand. "You're Emily Sinclair," he said softly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "You're a millionaire businesswoman. You had a car accident 6 months ago, but you're safe now." Emily blinked, as if hearing her own name for the first time. It didn't feel real. "Emily," she whispered, testing the name. "That's me." Ryan nodded, his fingers lingering near her cheek. He wanted to take her pain away. "You don't have to remember everything now," he assured her gently. "It'll come back with time, and until then, I'll be here." Emily's breath hitched. Why did that promise feel so much deeper than just words? The pull between them, something unexplainable. A wave of exhaustion washed over her, but she fought to keep her eyes open. She didn't want to lose him. "Ryan," she murmured, her voice carrying an unspoken plea. He leaned in instinctively, drawn by something unseen. "I'm here." Her lips parted slightly, and for a brief moment, it felt like time had stopped. His heartbeat thundered in his chest. Everything about this situation was strange, impossible. She was his patient, he was her doctor. They were strangers, and yet, it felt like they had always belonged to each other. Ryan exhaled shakily, forcing himself to step back. "You need rest," he said, his voice uneven. Emily didn't protest, but as she drifted back to sleep, her last words sent a shiver down his spine. "Don't leave me." Ryan clenched his fists. He wouldn't, he couldn't, even if he didn't understand this pull between them. He knew one thing: he would never let her go. Unspoken longing. Ryan sat by Emily's bedside long after she had fallen asleep, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest. He had promised himself that he would maintain his professionalism, that he wouldn't get emotionally involved. But it was already too late. Something about her pulled him in, a connection he couldn't explain. His fingers itched to brush a strand of hair from her face, but he clenched his fists, resisting the urge. She was his patient, and yet, when she had whispered, "Don't leave me," he had felt it in his very soul. Why did it feel like they had known each other forever? His head fell back against the chair, his mind clouded with exhaustion. But sleep never came, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw her. The first signs of memory. The next morning, when Emily opened her eyes, the first thing she searched for was him. Her gaze scanned the hospital room frantically, until it landed on Ryan, who had fallen asleep in the chair beside her. A strange warmth filled her chest. He stayed. She watched him, his long lashes resting against his cheekbones, his expression peaceful in sleep. Why did he feel so familiar? As if drawn by an unseen force, Emily reached out with trembling fingers and touched his hand. Ryan's eyes snapped open instantly, locking onto hers. "Emily," he breathed, sitting up. "You're awake." A slow, hesitant smile tugged at her lips. "You stayed," she whispered. Ryan swallowed hard. "Of course I did." For a moment, they just stared at each other, something unspoken passing between them. And then, Emily's brows furrowed. A flicker of something flashed through her mind, so quick, so fleeting that she almost missed it. A soft laugh, a touch, a whisper of his name on her lips. Her breath hitched. She clutched her head as pain shot through her skull. Ryan was instantly alert, worry flashing in his eyes. "Emily, what's wrong?" I think I remembered something," she murmured, but it was just a feeling. A moment. Ryan's heart pounded. What did you feel? She hesitated before whispering. I felt safe, and I think it was because of you. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. A moment that changed everything. A knock on the door shattered the moment. Ryan quickly composed himself as a nurse entered. Good morning, Miss Sinclair, she greeted. Your family has been notified of your awakening, and they'll be visiting soon. Emily's expression faltered. Her family, the people she was supposed to know, to love. Why did she feel nothing? Ryan noticed the shift in her demeanor, the way her fingers curled into the hospital blanket. He wanted to tell her it was okay, that she didn't have to force anything. But before he could, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with something raw. Will you stay? Ryan's chest ached. She was surrounded by doctors, nurses, and soon, the family she had forgotten. But the only person she wanted by her side was him. Always, he promised. And in that moment, he knew. It didn't matter if she didn't remember him, because his heart already belonged to her. A stranger's embrace. The air in the hospital room felt heavier than before. Emily's heart pounded as she waited, knowing her family would arrive soon. Yet, instead of excitement or comfort, a strange emptiness filled her. Would she recognize them? Would they remind her of who she was? She glanced at Ryan, the only familiar presence in the room, even though she didn't remember why. She had barely had time to process this connection she felt toward him, when the door swung open. Emily, a middle-aged woman with elegant features, rushed to her bedside, her expensive perfume flooding the room. Behind her, a tall, sharp-faced man stood stiffly. Emily felt her breath hitch. Her mind screamed that she should know them, that they should feel like home. But they didn't. A name without a memory. Sweetheart, the woman whispered, cupping Emily's face, her eyes glistening. You're finally awake. I've prayed for this moment every day. Emily forced a polite smile, her fingers clutching the hospital sheets. Do you know me? She asked hesitantly. The woman's face faltered for a split second, but she quickly masked it with a soft laugh. Oh darling, I'm your mother, Evelyn Sinclair, and this is your father Charles. Emily's throat went dry. Her mother, her father. She tried to feel something: love, warmth, familiarity, but all she felt was nothing. The overwhelming weight of expectations. Charles stepped forward, clearing his throat. We're glad you're back, Emily. The company has been waiting for your return. Company. A sharp pang of unease struck her. Her father's eyes weren't filled with relief or concern. They were filled with expectation. Emily shifted uncomfortably, stealing a glance at Ryan. He was the only one who noticed her hesitation. Let's not rush her, Ryan said gently. She's just woken up. She needs time. Evelyn turned to Ryan, her eyes narrowing slightly. And you are Dr. Ryan Carter, he said, offering a polite smile. Emily's physician. Evelyn gave a tight nod. Well, Dr. Carter, we appreciate your service, but we'll be handling things from here. A strange panic shot through Emily's chest. Handling things. Would they take her away? Would she never see Ryan again? Without thinking, her fingers reached for Ryan's hand under the blanket, gripping it tightly. Ryan's eyes flickered to hers, his breath catching. The touch was soft, desperate, like a silent plea. Her mother's eyes narrowed slightly at the small movement. I think I need rest, Emily whispered, hoping they would leave. Evelyn hesitated, but finally nodded. We'll be back soon. The world is waiting for you, Emily. You're not just anyone, you're a Sinclair. Emily forced a weak smile, but inside, she felt like a stranger in her own life. The only thing that felt real. Once they left, silence filled the room. Emily let out a shaky breath, her fingers still clutching Ryan's hand. I don't feel anything for them, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I know I should, but they don't feel like my family. Ryan's heart ached for her. He knew the pain of being surrounded by people yet feeling utterly alone. It's okay, he murmured. Your memories will come back when they're ready. She turned to him, searching his face. But what if I don't want them to? She whispered. Ryan's chest tightened, because deep down, he didn't want her to change either. He wanted this Emily, the one who looked at him like he was her safe place, the one whose touch felt like home. And as they sat there, hands entwined, Ryan knew something had shifted between them. A line had been crossed, and there was no turning back. A restless heart. That night, Emily lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind a tangled mess of emotions. Her parents had visited again, speaking of her responsibilities, her past, her future, but none of it felt real. They told her she was a wealthy heiress, the future CEO of Sinclair Enterprises. They told her she had a grand life waiting for her. Yet, the only thing that felt real was Ryan. Every time she closed her eyes, it wasn't her parents' voices she heard, it was his. "You're not alone. Take your time. I'll be here." His voice wrapped around her like a soothing melody, calming her stormy thoughts. And suddenly, she couldn't stay in bed any longer. She needed to see him. A late-night confession. Emily slipped out of her hospital bed, her bare feet padding against the cold floor. Her body still felt weak, but her heart was stronger than ever. With quiet steps, she walked toward the doctor's lounge. She didn't know why. She just knew he'd be there. And she was right. Through the half-open door, she saw Ryan sitting alone at a desk, running a tired hand through his hair. The sight of him, so lost in thought, so beautifully unaware of how much he meant to her, sent a wave of warmth through her chest. She took a deep breath, and knocked lightly. Ryan turned, startled. "Emily." His brows furrowed in concern. "What are you doing here? You should be resting." She stepped inside, hesitating for only a second before whispering, "I couldn't sleep." Ryan exhaled softly, rubbing the back of his neck. "That makes two of us." Emily bit her lip. "Can I stay here for a while?" Ryan hesitated, but only for a moment. Then he nodded. Of course. An undeniable connection. She sat on the couch across from him, tucking her legs beneath her. For a few moments, there was only silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that spoke volumes. Ryan finally broke it. "What's on your mind?" Emily looked at him, her eyes searching his, and then, the words tumbled out, before she could stop them. "I don't feel anything for my family," she whispered. "I don't recognize them. I don't remember my life. But when I look at you, Ryan," she hesitated, her voice trembling, "I feel something." Ryan's breath caught in his throat. She continued, her voice growing stronger. "I don't know what it is, but when I wake up, I look for you. When I'm scared, I want you there. And when I think about the future," she swallowed hard, "I don't want it without you." A storm of emotions flashed through Ryan's eyes. He had spent weeks telling himself that he couldn't fall for her, that she was his patient, that she deserved a life beyond this hospital. But now, with her sitting here, looking at him like he was the only thing she was sure of, he couldn't fight it anymore. "Emily." His voice was hoarse, filled with unspoken emotions. She leaned closer, her heart pounding, her body trembling with something she couldn't name. And then, in the quiet of the night, with only the sound of their breathing between them, Ryan reached out, his fingers gently brushing against hers. It was the smallest touch, but it sent fire through both of them. Emily's lips parted slightly, her breath shaky. "Tell me I'm not crazy," she whispered. Ryan swallowed hard. "You're not crazy," he murmured. Then why did it feel so impossible? Why did it feel like they had lived this moment before? Like their souls had known each other long before memory ever could? The beginning of something more. Ryan knew he should stop this. He should pull away, remind her that she was still recovering, that emotions could be fragile after trauma. But when Emily looked at him like that, like he was the only thing keeping her grounded, how could he? Slowly, ever so slowly, he lifted her hand to his lips, and when he pressed the softest, most tender kiss against her fingers, Emily's breath caught, because in that moment, she knew this was more than attraction, more than gratitude. It was fate, a moment that changed everything. Emily's fingers still tingled, where Ryan's lips had touched them. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a whisper of something undeniable, something unstoppable. She wasn't sure how she got here, how a billionaire heiress could be sitting in a dimly lit doctor's lounge, staring at a man who wasn't supposed to mean anything to her. And yet, he did. Everything about him, the warmth in his gaze, the way he listened, the way he made her feel safe, felt more real than anything her family had told her about her past life. She searched his face for answers, for something to hold on to. "Ryan," she whispered, "tell me what this is." Ryan swallowed hard, his grip tightening around her hand. He had spent so long denying this feeling, pushing it away, reminding himself of all the reasons why they suck, why they could never happen. But this moment, this was different. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice raw. "But I know that when you woke up, my world shifted, and I can't go back to how it was before."
His confession sent a shiver down her spine. Emily's breath hitched as she reached out, tracing the rough calluses on his palm. "Then don't go back," she murmured. Ryan exhaled sharply, his control slipping. "Emily, this isn't right." Her brows furrowed. "Why not?" "Because," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you're still recovering. You don't even remember your past." "But I remember you," she said, her voice trembling. Silence filled the space between them. And then Emily did something she never would have done before, something that felt so natural, so right, that she didn't stop herself. She leaned in, and Ryan didn't move away. A kiss that changed everything. His breath was warm, his heartbeat erratic beneath her fingertips. Emily tilted her head, her lips hovering near his, her body drawn to him like the tide to the shore. One more inch. Her eyes fluttered shut, and then Ryan broke. He cupped her face, his hands firm yet reverent, as though he had been holding himself back for far too long. And then he kissed her. The moment their lips met, the world fell away. There was no hospital, no past, no rules, just them. The kiss was slow, hesitant at first, like an unanswered question. But when Emily melted into him, when her hands slid up his chest, Ryan lost himself completely. He deepened the kiss, pouring weeks of restraint, of longing, of unspoken emotions into it. Emily's fingers curled into his shirt, pulling him closer, needing more, needing him. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise that whatever this was, it was real, that whatever happened next, neither of them could walk away now. The aftermath of a kiss, when they finally pulled apart, their breaths were ragged, their foreheads touching. Emily's cheeks were flushed, her lips swollen, her heart pounding against her ribs. But it wasn't this, which he seeks but it was. Ryan's hand lingered on her jaw, his thumb tracing a slow, gentle circle on her skin. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, they held a depth of emotion that made her chest tighten. "We shouldn't have done that," he finally whispered, though his voice lacked conviction. Emily let out a soft, breathy laugh. "Then why did it feel so right?" Ryan closed his eyes, exhaling shakily. "Because it did. It felt like everything, but it also felt dangerous." And when he opened his eyes again, reality came crashing back. "You have a life outside this hospital, Emily," he said, his voice pained. "A past, a family, a future that doesn't include me." Her brows knitted together, pain flickering in her expression. "What if I don't want that future?" Ryan shook his head. "You don't know that." Emily clenched her fists. "So you're saying this meant nothing?" Ryan swallowed hard. "I'm saying it can't mean everything." The words hit her like a blow. Her heart squeezed, an ache settling deep within her. And for the first time since she woke up, she felt something she didn't want to feel. Fear. Fear that no matter how real this felt, Ryan would push her away, that fate had brought them together, only to rip them apart. A love that can't be denied. Emily stood up, stepping away from him, her heart aching with something she couldn't name. She had never been the type to beg for love, but with Ryan, she wanted to fight, and she would, because no matter what he said, no matter what obstacles lay ahead, she knew the truth. She wasn't alone anymore, and neither was he. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. A heart at war. Emily lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling of her hospital room. The taste of Ryan's kiss still lingered on her lips. She touched her fingers to them, her chest rising and falling, with slow, measured breaths, but nothing could slow the storm raging inside her. She had always imagined love as something gentle, something slow, but this was a wildfire, a force of nature pulling her toward him, despite every reason to turn away. Ryan had kissed her, and then he had tried to take it back. His words echoed in her mind. It can't mean everything, but it did. It had meant everything to her. She squeezed her eyes shut. Why was he so afraid? Ryan's inner battle. On the other side of the hospital, Ryan sat in his office, his head in his hands. His heart still ached with the weight of what had happened. He had told himself to stay away, to remain professional, to not let his heart betray him. But then Emily had looked at him with those eyes that saw past every wall he had built, and he had crumbled. The way she fit against him, the way her lips had trembled against his, it had undone him. But reality was a cruel thing. Emily wasn't just another patient. She was a billionaireess, and he was no one. She belonged to a world of grandeur, wealth, and legacy, and he had spent his whole life fighting to survive. How could he ever be enough for her? A risk worth taking. The next morning, Emily made a decision. She wasn't going to let Ryan run away from this, not without a fight. She found him near the hospital garden, sitting alone, lost in thought. The sight of him, so distant, so conflicted, sent a pang through her chest. She walked toward him, her steps sure, her heart set. He looked up, startled, as she sat beside him. "Emily," he started, but she cut him off. "I'm not letting you push me away, Ryan," he exhaled, his jaw clenching. "Emily, you don't understand." "No, you don't understand," she shot back, her voice filled with fire. "You think I care about the life I had before this coma. I don't. I care about what I feel now." Ryan's hands tightened into fists. "This isn't about what you feel now. It's about what happens when you remember everything. When you wake up one day and realize you belong to a different world." Emily leaned in, her eyes shining with determination. "And what if I don't want that world anymore?" Ryan's breath caught. She wasn't giving up. She wasn't letting go. "Ryan," she whispered, her fingers brushing his, "you changed my bandages. You healed my wounds. But somewhere along the way, you healed something else too." His throat tightened. "You healed my heart." Ryan closed his eyes, overwhelmed, and in that moment, he knew, no matter how much he tried to resist, no matter how much he told himself he wasn't good enough, he couldn't fight this anymore. He looked at her, his heart hammering. "Emily," she smiled, her fingers tangling with his. "Just say it," she whispered. A long silence stretched between them. "Then I love you." The words left his lips, unguarded, unfiltered. Emily's breath hitched, and then with a radiant smile, she whispered, "I love you too." Ryan exhaled a shaky breath. For the first time in forever, he felt free. No titles, no status, no past, just love. A love confession under the morning sun. Ryan's whispered confession still echoed in Emily's heart. "I love you." Those words had freed her, yet they also made her vulnerable in ways she never imagined. She had fought for this moment, fought for him, and now, sitting beside him in the hospital garden, fingers laced together, she felt something she hadn't in a long time. Peace. Ryan turned to her, his brown eyes dark with emotion. "I don't know how to do this, Emily," he admitted. "Loving you, it scares me." Her heart clenched. "Why?" she asked softly. Ryan exhaled, his fingers tightening around hers. "Because love has always been something that could be taken from me." Emily felt her chest ache at his words. She reached up,
cupping his face with both hands. "Ryan, I'm not going anywhere. I'm not something to be taken away. I'm yours." His lips parted slightly, and for the first time in a long time, hope flickered in his eyes. Without thinking, he leaned in, capturing her lips in a slow, deep kiss. This kiss wasn't hurried, wasn't desperate. It was a promise of love, of devotion, of a future where they belonged together. When they pulled away, Ryan rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "You're everything I never knew I needed," he whispered. Emily smiled, her fingers tracing gentle patterns on his cheek. "Then stop fighting it. A storm looms ahead." Just as the morning felt perfect, reality came crashing in. A voice interrupted them. "Miss Carter." Emily and Ryan both turned to see James Holloway, her family's attorney, standing a few feet away. Ryan instantly stiffened, his hand slipping away from hers. James adjusted his glasses, his face unreadable. "We need to talk." Emily's stomach twisted. She knew this day would come, the day she would have to face her past. Ryan stood up, instantly protective. "If it's legal matters, they can wait," he said, his voice firm. James gave Ryan a sharp look before turning back to Emily. "It's urgent." Emily swallowed and nodded. "Fine, let's talk in my room." Ryan hesitated. Emily turned to him, placing a hand on his chest. "I'll be okay." His fingers curled around hers for a brief moment, before he nodded and let go. But in his heart, a storm was brewing. The truth Emily had forgotten back in her room. James sat across from Emily, his expression serious. "You need to know the truth about your past, Emily." Her heartbeat quickened. James took out a file, sliding it toward her. "You own Carter Enterprises. The board has been holding off, but they need you back. Without your leadership, the company is at risk." Emily frowned. She hesitated. "I don't even remember the company, James. I don't remember being some powerful CEO." James nodded. "That's understandable, but whether you remember or not, it's still yours, and you have a responsibility." Emily stared at the documents in front of her. A billion-dollar empire, a world she no longer felt connected to. She didn't want that life. She wanted Ryan. James cleared his throat. "There's more." Emily looked up, sensing the tension in his voice. He hesitated, before finally saying, "Your engagement contract with Daniel Whitmore is still in place." The air left Emily's lungs. "Engagement, contract," she whispered. James nodded. "Before your accident, you were set to marry Daniel. It was a business arrangement, a merger between two powerful families." Emily's mind spun. Engaged to a man she didn't even remember. Her heart screamed in protest. She looked at James, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't love him." James hesitated. "That might not matter to your family. They expect you to fulfill your obligations." Emily's hands trembled. Obligations. She had just found real love, and now, she was being dragged back into a life she no longer recognized. Ryan overhears everything outside the door. Ryan had stopped in his tracks. His heart pounded violently. Engaged. He had just told Emily he loved her. He had let himself believe, just for a moment, that they had a chance. But now, reality was crashing down around him. Emily wasn't his to love. She belonged to a world of billionaires, of business deals, of arranged marriages. Ryan turned away, his jaw clenched. He had made a mistake. He had let himself dream, but dreams weren't for people like him. And Emily, she was never meant to be his. Ryan walks away, but his heart remains. Ryan's mind was spinning as he walked away from Emily's hospital room, each step feeling heavier than the last, his hands clenched into fists, his heart aching with a pain he had never known before. Engaged. The word echoed in his head, like a cruel joke. He had let himself believe, just for a moment, that she was his, that their love could be enough. But now, he felt like a fool. The weight of reality crashed down on him. Emily Carter wasn't just a woman recovering from an accident. She was a billionaire, a CEO, A woman with a past he could never be part of, and she belonged to another man. Ryan exhaled sharply and pushed open the hospital doors, stepping into the cool night air. His chest felt tight, like he couldn't breathe. You knew this would happen, he whispered to himself. Yet, knowing didn't make it hurt any less. He loved her, and that was the problem. Emily's desperate search for Ryan. Back in her hospital room, Emily was reeling. An engagement contract. She didn't remember agreeing to marry Daniel Whitmore, and she didn't care. She only knew one thing. She couldn't lose Ryan. Frantic, she turned to James. "Where is he?" James hesitated. "Emily, this isn't just about love. This is about your future, your company." "I don't care about the company right now," she snapped, her pulse racing. "I need to find Ryan." She threw off the blanket, swinging her legs over the bed. "Miss Carter, you just woke from a coma," James reminded her. "You need rest." "I need Ryan," she said, her voice breaking. A tear slipped down her cheek. James sighed. He left Emily. Her heart stopped. She didn't even realize she was shaking until her fingers dug into the sheets. No, he wouldn't just leave, she whispered. But deep down, she knew. Ryan thought she belonged to someone else, and he was pushing her away. Emily inhaled shakily, her resolve hardening. She wasn't going to let him walk away, not without a fight. Confrontation at the riverfront. Emily ignored James's protests as she rushed out of the hospital, the cold night air hitting her skin. She had no idea where Ryan was. Then she remembered the riverfront, the place where they had shared their first real moment together, when she had laughed for the first time in forever. Her heart pounded as she got into a taxi. "Please, let me be right." Minutes later, the car screeched to a stop near the river. Emily threw open the door, running down the dimly lit path, and then she saw him. Ryan stood by the water, his hands shoved into his pockets, staring at the dark waves. Her breath caught. "Ryan," she called. He stiffened. For a second, he didn't turn around, because if he did, he knew his heart would shatter all over again. But then her footsteps drew closer, and he couldn't help it. He turned, and when he saw her standing there, wind in her hair, eyes glistening with unshed tears, his heart broke all over again. "You left," she said, breathless. Ryan clenched his jaw. "You should go back, Emily." Her brows furrowed. "No, you're engaged," he said hoarsely. "You belong to another man." "I don't love him," she whispered. "I love you." Ryan's breath hitched. Those 3 words, he wanted to believe them. God, he wanted to. But how could he? "You don't remember your past," he said bitterly. "What if you wake up one day and realize you want that life back? The money, the power, the man you were supposed to marry." Emily stepped closer, her fingers trembling as she reached for his hand. "I already woke up Ryan," she said softly, "and the only thing I wanted was you." His throat tightened. "Don't push me away," she begged, her voice breaking. Ryan squeezed his eyes shut. He was strong. He had always been strong. But when she looked at him like that, like he was her entire world, he broke. Before he could stop himself, he pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. Emily let out a shaky breath, gripping his shirt, like she was afraid he'd disappear. "I love you," she whispered against his skin. Ryan exhaled, pressing his forehead to hers. "You have no idea how much I love you," he admitted. Then he kissed her. It wasn't just a kiss. It was desperation, love, a promise, the kind of kiss that made the world fade away. And for that moment, nothing else mattered. Not her past, not the engagement, just them. The morning after, a new beginning, or a new battle. Emily woke up in Ryan's arms, the morning sun casting a golden glow over them. The river's soft waves lapped against the shore, and the world felt peaceful, as if for a moment, their love had stopped time itself. She shifted slightly, her fingers tracing Ryan's jawline. He looked so peaceful, his chest rising and falling, with steady breaths. Her heart swelled. She had never known love like this. Raw, consuming, undeniable. But reality came crashing down the moment Ryan stirred, his deep brown eyes opening to meet hers. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Ryan exhaled. "Emily." His voice was hoarse, conflicted. Emily knew what he was going to say, that she still had a life waiting for her, that last night had been a mistake, and she wasn't going to let him. She cupped his face, her eyes burning with determination. "Don't push me away, Ryan." He swallowed hard. "It's not that simple, but it is." She sat up, holding his gaze. "I love you. I want to be with you." Ryan ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "Emily, you're still engaged to Daniel. Your family, they're powerful. They'll fight to keep you in that life." Emily's jaw tightened. "Then let them fight, because I'm not backing down." Ryan stared at her, torn between hope and fear. And then a car pulled up behind them. Daniel's arrival, a bitter confrontation. Emily turned. As the car door slammed shut, her heart stopped. Daniel Whitmore, tall, handsome, with a sharp, calculating gaze, and anger burning in his eyes. "Emily," he said coldly, stepping closer. "What the hell is going on?" Ryan immediately tensed, stepping protectively in front of Emily. Daniel's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, so this is what's been keeping you busy." He gave Ryan a mocking glance. "A small-time doctor." Emily's eyes flashed with fury. "Daniel, stop, stop." Daniel scoffed. "You disappear from the hospital, and I find you in the arms of some nobody." Ryan's fists clenched, but Emily grabbed his hand before he could react. "He is not a nobody," she said fiercely, "and I am not yours." Daniel's expression darkened. "Do you even remember, Emily? Your father arranged our engagement. The contract was signed. You belong to me." Ryan stiffened beside her. Emily inhaled sharply, her pulse racing. Her father. She knew Daniel wasn't here by accident. Her family had sent him, but she wasn't afraid. She squared her shoulders, her voice unwavering. "I don't belong to anyone," she said. "Not to you, not to my father. I choose my own life." Daniel's smirk faded. "Do you really think they'll let you?" Emily swallowed. "They don't have a choice." Daniel stepped closer. "You're making a mistake, Emily." Ryan finally spoke, his voice dangerously calm. "The only mistake she made was ever being with you." Daniel's eyes flickered with irritation. "And what do you think you can give her, doctor?" "Love." He laughed bitterly. "Love doesn't pay the bills. It doesn't secure an empire." Ryan's gaze was steady. "Love is worth more than all of that." Emily's chest tightened. That's why she loved him. Because Ryan wasn't fighting for her wealth, her status. He was fighting for her. Daniel exhaled sharply. "Fine. You want to throw away your future. Go ahead." His expression turned cold. "But your family won't let this slide." And with that, he turned on his heel and walked away. Emily's breath was shaky. She knew Daniel wasn't lying. Her father wasn't going to let her go so easily. A choice that changes everything. Ryan turned to her. "Emily, are you sure about this?" She took his hands, squeezing them tightly. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." His eyes softened, his walls crumbling. "Then we'll fight together." Emily smiled, tears brimming in her eyes. "Together." And as Ryan pulled her into his arms, pressing a deep lingering kiss to her lips, she knew their love was worth any battle. A dangerous ultimatum. Emily barely had time to catch her breath before her worst fear became reality. That evening, as she and Ryan sat in his small apartment, the door burst open. Two of her father's men stormed in. She gasped, gripping Ryan's hand. One of them, a tall, cold-eyed man in a black suit, handed her an envelope. "Your father requests your presence, Miss Emily." Immediately, her heart pounded. She knew what this meant. Her father wasn't asking, he was demanding. Ryan stood protectively in front of her. "She's not going anywhere." The man smirked. "That's not your decision, doctor." Emily clenched her jaw, pulling the envelope open. Inside was a one-way plane ticket to Paris. Her father's message was clear. Leave Ryan, or be exiled forever. The heartbreaking choice. Emily looked up at Ryan, her heart breaking. If she left with them, she would be trapped in a life she didn't want. But if she stayed, Her father would do everything in his power to destroy Ryan's career, his reputation, his entire life. Tears burned her eyes. Ryan cupped her face gently. "Emily, look at me." She blinked up at him. "I love you," he whispered. "No matter what happens." She choked back a sob. "Ryan, I can't let them hurt you." "Then don't," he said, his voice steady. "We fight together." The men scoffed. "You have 10 seconds to decide, Miss Emily. Walk away, or we will handle things our way." Emily's entire body shook, but then, her decision became crystal clear. Choosing love, no matter the cost, with fire in her eyes. She stepped forward, lifting her chin. "You can go back to my father," she said firmly, "and tell him I'm never coming back." The men exchanged a glance. "Miss Emily, get out," Ryan interrupted, his voice dark with warning. For a moment, the room tensed with unspoken danger. Then, realizing Emily's mind was made up, the men turned and left. The moment the door shut, Emily collapsed against Ryan, sobbing. He held her tightly, stroking her hair. "It's over," he murmured. "We're free." She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. "Are we?" Ryan nodded. "Your father can't control you anymore. He lost." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Then why does it still hurt?" Ryan gently wiped it away. "Because you love deeply." "But Emily, love like that is worth everything." She stared at him, her heart pounding, and then she kissed him. Not just a kiss of passion, but of forever. 1 year later, a love that survived. The world had changed. Emily had lost her inheritance, her title, her wealth, but she had gained something so much greater. As she sat in the small clinic where Ryan worked, watching him help people with nothing but kindness in his heart, she realized this was the life she wanted all along. Ryan turned to her, smiling. "Mrs. Carter." She blinked, still getting used to her new name. She smiled back. "Yes, Dr. Carter." He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her lips. "I love you," she sighed happily. "And I love you. No contracts, no empires, no forced marriages. Just love, and that was worth everything."